Here's Hawkman. I'm Bob Harrison. I work for Pop Culture Squad. I do interviews and reviews. And on our panel, we have Mike Gold. We have Jack C. Harris. Rob Venditti. And Jerry Ordway. So we're going to kind of talk about Hawkman and what he's done in comics, where we've seen him, where he's come from, where he's maybe going. But I wanted to do this panel last year before the world shut down. When I saw that Rob was going to be here, I thought this would be a great place to talk about comics, the greatest comic show. So this is our folks, and we're really lucky to have Jack, who was not planning to be here, and that's why he's not on your agenda, but I'm really glad he joined us. Mike is well known as the editor for First Comics and DC Comics and other comics. He most is tied to Hawkman with the work on Hawkworld, which we're going to get into. He can't hear me, that's okay. Jerry is a legendary comic artist for DC Comics and worked on All-Star Squadron and Infinity Inc. in the 80s when I fell in love with him. And Rob Venditti is a comic writer who has completed the most recent series of Hawkman, which we were just kind of mentioning, and we'll get into more of that. It was a massive undertaking to help reorganize and fish through the history of complicated Hawkman. And Jack was an editor and writer at DC, we're going to get some great stories from, hopefully.
No pressure.
So, it's great. So, who is Hawkman? Obviously, everyone here knows what we're talking about, or you wouldn't be here. But, he is known as Carter Hall, was once Prince Khufu, and also known to this from Silver Age on as Katar Hall. So, Rob, I wanted you to kind of give your perspective, because you've done the most recent historical dive. What do you think the character of Hawkman, how does he fit in the world he lives in?
Yeah, so it's a bit of a long answer. I'll try not to go too long with it. But so I didn't grow up reading comic books at all, right? I read my first comic when I was in my mid-20s. So when DC asked me if I wanted to pitch on Hawkman, literally all I knew about the character was the visual I remembered from the old Super Friends cartoon or whatever. I didn't know anything about Carter Hall, Katar Hall, any of those things. So when I sat down and started to research the character, that first night, just to kind of try to come up with what ideas I would do with the character, my immediate thought as I was reading it was, oh, I get it. He reincarnates across time and space, and the guy from Thanagar is the same as the Egyptian guy or whatever. I just kept reading, and that never happened. So I was like, well, I think that's what I'm going to do then, because that makes perfect sense to me. And what I always say is you can't fake stupid, right? So if I had grown up my whole life reading Hawkman, it might have been cemented in my brain that these were two completely different characters, and Carter Hall could never be the same person as Katar Hall. But because I didn't know any of that, I just came in with that assumption, and that's what the story ended up turning into.
You found the exact right space.
But again, because I was dumb. You know what I mean? I didn't know any better.
Let's hear it for stupidity.
Exactly, yeah.
That is the perfect way to move after Crisis on Infinite Earths. Prior to Crisis on Infinite Earths, your story doesn't work. But after that, in the world we lived in, post-Crisis, that's exactly how it should have happened.
Right.
Yeah, and so when I talked to Brian Hitch about it, I don't know if anybody's, I'm sure you all are familiar with Brian Hitch's work, but not just an amazing artist, but also extremely creative in and of himself in terms of story and writing, And when I kind of said, well, my pitch for the character is that he reincarnates across time and space, so that means not only was he an ancient Egyptian, he was a Thanagarian, but he could have been a new god, he could have been whatever, and Brian was like, he could have been on Krypton, and I was like, absolutely, he could have been on Krypton, And so where I see Hawkman sitting is he now is the living historical document of the DC universe. He could have been anywhere, he could have seen anything. He's now a character that's so versatile, he'd become a part of any story, because he's lived all of that history. And so I see him as one of the most foundational characters in the storytelling version of the universe.
Right.
which fits who he is as an actual character because he is one of the foundational characters of all of comic books. You know, that's kind of how I see where it fits in.
Great. So, character was created in the 40s by Gardner Fox, and was first appeared in Flash Comics, and was also in All-Star Comics as a member of the Justice Society of America, and was pretty foundational to the DC universe as it was. I mean, there was some level of sharedness because there were these characters who were interacting with each other, you know, and not including Batman, Wonder Woman, and Superman. And so in that world, Hawkman had a really powerful say as you know, as leader of the group, and how, when did you first read?
Well, let me step back to, since I wasn't around in the 1940s, just barely missed it. Hawkman was the most popular DC All-American character who never got his own title. It was always on the verge, and Julie Schwartz told me that from time to time they would consider it, but they never did. They never got the sense that he was popular enough to hold his own title, but he came real close.
He was the only character that appeared in every adventure of the early All-Star comic.
Right,
Only one.
right, because he didn't get his own comic.
Right, but he was in every adventure they had.
So when they brought back, to actually get around to Bob's question for a change, when they brought back Hawkman after the successful relaunches of The Flash and Green Lantern, and the Justice League certainly, he got this powerful 3-issue Brave and Bold series that was written by Gardner, who created the character, and named the character after his favorite pipe tobacco, and Joe Kubert, who's the last major artist on Hawkman during the Golden Age. Joe, of course, got into the business, I think, when he was still a zygote. So, you know, his work.
This Hawkman with the gold
Right.
cap is from Flash Comics 101, I think, which was Joe in 48.
Yeah, and he'd already been doing it for a few years.
And then this is his design for the Santa Gardner.
Right. So I'm 9 years old when this Brave and Bold comes out. And I'm living in Chicago, and my mother's taking me downtown to my eye doctor appointment, my first eye doctor appointment. And there's a news rack there, and I saw this first Hawkman appearance, and I went apeshit. It's like, what the hell is that? Oh my God, this is beautiful. I coerced my mother into buying the comic book, and I read a few pages of it before we got to my eye doctor. Then the eye doctor puts like these eye drops in my eyes, right? And back in those days, once they put eye drops in your eyes, the whole world looks like a Peter Max painting. So I couldn't go anywhere with it. I couldn't read it, but I wanted to. And I'm looking at the pictures, and they said my mother went nuts, which was easy, and said, you know, you're not supposed to look while you're hallucinating, whatever. And so, all right. Finally, the drops wore off. My exam was finished, and I plopped there in the waiting room to finish reading that damn comic book. It was not successful, the 3-issue run, but it was almost successful, so they gave it another 3-issue run. And that was almost successful, so they gave it a sort of a backup status in Mystery in Space, sharing it with Adam Strange, which coincidentally made for this relationship that exists to this day that you have just beautifully in between Adam Strange and Hawkman. Never successful to the point of being a big deal. Always just below that level. And everybody and their mother revived Hawkman over at DC because they wanted it. It's an important property. but also because everybody wanted to do it. There's no shortage of people who wanted to do Hawkman. And it, you know, I mean, okay, a 41 issue run, that's pretty good. And, you know, 27 issues you
29.
did? 29. That's brilliant.
There was an annual and some other stuff. There's more than
Just 29, yeah.
Well, no, I meant that's the 29. There were some other pieces around that you wrote for it, right?
No, I only wrote 29 issues. Unless I'm mistaken, in which case somebody owes me some checks I don't know about. But my memory is I only wrote 29 of
That's
them.
probably
Some
true,
of
though.
the death metal stuff.
But they tied into our
tied
book.
into your
We
stuff.
didn't have to, I didn't have to go anywhere and do
Good,
anything. I
good,
stayed in
good.
Hawkman, yeah.
So all of this is absolutely true. He did finally get his own series that launched at Hawkman, and I think it went 20. Would you say 20 issues in the 670s?
The Silver Age one, I believe, was 27, but then it split off
And
and
then it
became the Adam and Hawkman,
Well, I think
which
so
is some of
now-
the greatest
so
Silver
what
Age
happened,
covers
though,
of any
Adam
comics you'll ever
existed
see.
before that.
Like the one of him shooting a slingshot,
Yeah.
you know, like, that's just
So
so
the
cool.
Adam series existed, and then Hawkman joined his.
Correct,
series.
yeah.
So I think they got rid of Hawkman and just kind of put the two books together.
Yeah, and that ran for maybe 8 issues, I think. And it
So-
was every other month or something.
Yeah.
Right. That's my mom.
And then
I sound like a
early-
Hawkman scholar. Can we all just absorb that for a second? Like, that's crazy. I didn't know I knew that much about Hawkman. All right, go ahead.
So there's so then we have the 70s where he was pretty much there's that wilderness of the early 70s at DC in terms of vibrant characters, and then we're going to get to Jerry really quick because I have a lot I want to talk to him about. But let's talk about the showcase issue.
All right,
That's what, when showcase was showcase ended. For those who don't know, in early like 71 or so, and the book was canceled and it was replaced short-lived series called First Issue Specials, which lasted 13 issues, which has been collected and it's fun to collect. There's some really bad stuff in there. There's some really good stuff in there.
There's a lot of
Lot of
really
bad
bad stuff there.
Warlord came out of it,
Lot
so
of
that's good. And it's probably the best Dr. Fate issue ever.
We
But-
had,
I agree.
I was introduced to Hawkman the same as Mike, those Brave and the Bold issues.
Yeah.
I think I might have been familiar with the Golden Age one. Was there one reprinted in the Pfeiffer book?
Yes.
Yes, okay, that's the first one I probably saw. And then Roy Thomas, when he was doing the fanzines in the early fandom, was a big fan of Hawkman. And he was always touting it in Alter Ego, the early mimeographed issues of Alter Ego that I was subscribed to. And so I was just very interested.
Bring the microphone a little closer.
And
Thanks.
when it debuted, I was all ready for it. I knew it was coming out, and I really, really liked it. And I was unfamiliar with Joe's work. So when I saw that, I just thought it was amazing. It was astonishing. And I was so disappointed when it didn't, because I think it was Julie Schwartz's first non-success. You know, he had done The Flash, he had done Green Lantern, he had done The Atom, and everybody just got their own book like automatically. So when Hawkman didn't get one, I go, what happened? You know? But then another 3 issues came out, and then that I think was the Shadow Thief in the first 3 or
I think it was the first 3, but
anyway, the Shadow Thief was the thing I said, well, you have to make it a book, just have him come back. That was a great character. And then when I was editing it in DC Comics, I had World's Finest. At the time was one of the dollar comics. It had a lot of features in it. We had Hawkman running in there. And it was these little 8-page stories. And I'm going, this is like terrible for this character, because I always thought with that wing spread, he's going to take up a lot of space. He needs a longer, epic story. So I pitched the
Showcase.
because everybody was pitching Showcase at that time.
Sure.
That was the word went out. Everyone pitched Showcase, and that one made it somehow. I don't know. You have a story.
I'll
about
tell
that.
you how it
Yeah.
made
Yeah, I want to know. Yeah, you got the story.
How I got involved, I don't know. I think I decided to get involved because I just love Hawkman and Adam Strange.
Yeah, I teamed them up.
But what you did originally was propose an Adam Strange miniseries, or a 3 series
Right.
for Showcase. And Jeanette Kahn, who's the publisher, said she didn't understand our reaction to Adam Strange. She thought the character was boring and very, very dated. She was only right about the latter part. He was dated, but not boring. And she said, no, we're not going to do this. She first took home one of the volumes of Mystery in Space to read it at home to see if she was missing something. So she did her due diligence. I'll give her that. She still didn't like it. Fine. So after a pregnant pause, I said, can we do maybe we'll do a Hawkman series instead. Can we do that? You know? And she goes, yeah, do the Hawkman series. So I tell Jack, okay, we're doing it as Hawkman. Same story. just
Out of strength.
yeah, just
cover.
And that was the first Rand Thanagar War, which
Yeah.
they carried off on later on. But that was the first one, was those 3 issues. That's what it was about.
that was to me that was just
I mean,
hilarious.
I brought every Hawkman and Adam Strange villain I could think of back into that story. You know, and the great thing about it was Murphy Anderson inked it, who inked the original, who drew that first series.
That
of
stuff up
Hawkman.
there, yeah.
And then he inked it over Al Milgrom, which is great. I still have a couple of the original artwork pages at home.
If any of you folks aspire to draw comics and particularly comic book covers, study Murphy's covers for Hawkman. Also his covers on Mystery in Space with Hawkman. Because Hawkman's a bitch to draw, but impossible to use on a cover. Look at those wings. It's going to dominate everything. And if you have Hawkgirl in it, or even Hawkwoman, it's all the harder. But Murphy pulled it off. He had full-figure Hawkman, full-figure Hawkgirl when it was important, and stuff was going on, and it was exciting, and you wanted to buy the book. Unfortunately, not quite enough people did. Just close enough.
So there was the showcase issues, and then he kind of faded back. But then he did show up. Roy used him. Now it's interesting that Jack said that Roy liked the
Oh,
character
he loved it. That was one of his
because
favorites.
Jerry. It certainly appeared that the way he treated Earth 2's Hawkman was a cranky old pain in the ass.
Yeah.
Did you feel that?
Here's the thing, when I was working on All-Star Squadron, I knew Roy loved Hawkman. Roy loved, like all of the Earth 2 characters, he loved a very specific version of it. Hawkman's a character that, you know, had different mask changes. A lot of the other characters didn't go through as drastic wardrobe change, basically. Hawkman had a cloth mask. Hawkman had the full head mask. And Roy really loved Joe Kubert, you know, at age 14, 15 or whatever, when he was doing the Hawkman. He had this monstrous kind of full beak headgear that was almost overwhelming. You know, the way Joe drew him, he looked like Joe Kubert was one of the few artists who could do like a 8 foot tall, 8 head feet tall character proportion wise and make it work. But in the 40s, his Hawkman looked like he was about 5 foot tall, almost like the Michael Keaton Batman, really, where the headgear almost overwhelms the body. And I always felt like maybe that was that could have appealed to Roy, because Roy would admit that he wasn't a tall person, that he gravitated towards liking the Atom, and I think Hawkman was kind of like the original Wolverine in a way. Kubert always drew it really viscerally. He had what other character had a mace and the weapons. The other interesting thing about Hawkman as a character, to me, as when I was drawing this, was it's one of the few characters, especially in the 40s, it was a husband and wife kind of, or male female. They were adventurers. They were also archaeologists, which was kind of a classic trope in that you'd think that everybody in 1930 was an archaeologist or a rich industrialist or something. Nobody was poor, But that made it appealing. And so when I was working on the book, the one specific thing Roy would do is, when I was first finishing over Rich Buckler and then over Adrian Gonzalez, it was that I always had to course correct that headgear, because Roy had this specific version that Kubert did. So in the third cover, you see he's like that 3/4 view. That was the only time that headgear really looked right, because Kubert always avoided for the most part, he didn't do very many straight-on shots because it looked weird. I mean, it looks really creepy and scary from a 3/4. So I'd have to take Rich Buckler, headshots and tilt them because the mask that he was drawing like the 70s version. So, but Roy specifically, those were art corrections that were always like consistent. And if I veered a little bit too far from Peter, it was, he needs to have the dark lines on the headgear, and the wings had to have a certain look. They looked like almost black leathery, and it was just blank. So you knew that, like, I could believe Roy was a giant fan of that because, like a lot of people, you fixate on what you read when you were 10 years old, maybe, or younger. It's like your first version of Batman or what have you. But he really loved those
In
characters.
the old fanzines, when they were in between the Brave and the Bold issues, in all the margins of the fanzines, it would say, "Help save Hawkman. Help save Hawkman."
That's
And
true.
he had a whole,
That's funny.
he wanted a letter writing campaign to go into DC to get Hawkman his own book.
Well, and Hawkman really he was in Justice League, but for that period of the 80s, he was primarily an All-Star Squadron character, which is kind of cool. And I think the audience that maybe even remembers that from the 80s, those characters could have certainly been forgotten, like Shadow, or, not relevant to a current audience. But I'm always amazed at the comic shows, how many people were really invested in these kind of characters like Liberty Bell. And I mean, Hawkman, that version fits in too. So it's kind of a cool way to keep a character, immortal in a way.
So for anyone who doesn't know, these are all Jerry's covers. I found, I had to limit myself to 4. There's tons of beautiful ones. Interestingly, for me, being kind of coming in age with comics in the early 80s and having Hawkman, the same character, exists in 2 series that I was reading, both being All-Star Squadron and Infinity Inc.
And different time periods.
But different, the same character, much different time periods. And particularly within Infinity Inc., his role in that and his son's, how did that, because that was really the first time that there was more than just Hawkgirl involved in Hawkman's life. Bringing Norda into the fold and Hector. What did Roy, why, do you know anything about why Roy went that way with him?
Well, I remember he wanted a Hawk character, which is where Norda came in. Norda was like a alien kind of race or whatever.
He was
bird people.
Northwind, if anyone doesn't know.
Northwind, yeah. So Roy wanted something as a visual representation of Hawkman, but he didn't want to. I mean, we played around with the idea of whether his son would be. I think at one point it was talked about possibly being a Dr. Fate or a Hour Man or something. I mean, it was interesting. We wound up doing. Mike Macklin and I designed Silver Scarab, and Silver Scarab was probably why Northwind is there, because Silver Scarab is definitely not giving the group that vibe.
And he didn't, and the character clearly didn't want to be Hawkman.
And he
didn't want to be Hawkman's legacy.
That was the fun part about that, doing a generational kind of thing, was that, you had Jade and Obsidian who wanted to meet their father. They had no relationship with their father. They weren't even sure, their father was Green Lantern. They thought it made sense. But Hawkman and, the Hawk woman, their son was kind of the one who he was the kid who just didn't, he had a bad relationship with it, Lyta had a good relationship with her mother, Wonder Woman. So it was a good mix, I think. But as you were mentioning, a Hawkman being kind of, when in All-Star Squadron, Roy always wrote him as the forceful team leader, or always wanting to be the team leader, which was good because it always felt like Green Lantern was a little wishy-washy as a leader type. And, you want the guy who looks like he's going to win the war, as your leader. In Infinity Inc., he kind of is more of a jerk, I think. He's played a little bit, but then...
But the story, it's not a story about him, it's a story about the younger generation.
Yeah.
But he is if you haven't read Infinity, first of all, it's crime that it's not been reprinted and that it's not available, but
As
please
seen
go
in
find it.
Stargirl. They should have done one of those books.
Exactly.
You know.
he's definitely seen. And I don't, when you did your research, did you look at the Infinity Inc. stuff or any of that?
So my research, because it gets to the point where it's just
Oh,
untenable,
sure.
you know, and the problem with Hawkman was the vast majority of it wasn't even reprinted.
Yeah.
So it's the only time in my life that I had to go actually assemble a collection of back issues, because not even the 90s stuff was collected. You know, the only collections really were, there were some Silver Age black and white, what they call them, showcase editions.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
those were collected, and then some of the Jeff Johns stuff had been collected. Other than that, no. But I did. It was a manageable amount, so I did go back and assemble everything. It was a Hawkman book, you know, not the Golden Age, of course, but all the Silver Age stuff. I read whatever Flash collections were available. Then I got, you know, the Hawkman, and then the Hawk World, and then the Hawk World series, and then the new Hawkman series. Like, I actually assembled all that stuff together.
That's awesome.
And I even built a Silver Age run. I'm only missing issue 4, the Zatanna issue.
Yeah.
And I'm missing one other issue, but I even got all of those. I mean, I got some beat up Raven the Bolts, you know.
That's fine.
But because I wanted to know what the characters looked like in color. Because the showcase editions I couldn't tell. So if I was writing a scene with, you know, Gentleman Ghost and Hawkman or whatever, I wanted to know how they would look in color, so I would know what kind of setting to put them in. And you know what I'm trying to say?
Yeah.
So I went and got all the Silver Age issues so I could at least look at them, you know, gently, gingerly, and see what everything looked like. But so I read all that stuff, but I didn't get into, other than Jeff Johns' JSA run, I didn't get into, you know, where the character branched out into these other things, because at that point, you know, you're going to spend 3 times as much money as you're going to earn. You know what I mean?
Again,
Jeff
not
did
collector.
address the, you know, the Golden Age stuff, because the Hawkman that's in JSA, that whole, you know, is a single Earth, basically.
Yeah,
so,
yeah.
you know, there's a way in on that without it being Earth 2 or whatever.
So, what, besides being in, besides the Golden Age Hawkman being in All-Star Squadron and Infinity Inc., the Silver Age Kadar Hall Hawkman, prior to Crisis on Infinite Earths, was part of a, so Tony Isabella brought him back and did the Shadow War Hawkman, which was a 4-issue miniseries which kind of brought the character back and got a regular series for, I don't know what, 15 issues, somewhere in that range?
17 or 19 maybe?
Somewhere in there. And then kind of, you know, wasn't around, and eventually we ended up with Hawk World. So how did we do that?
Yeah, this is the part. This was the most influential thing to me of all the Hawkman stuff I read. Was those 3 issues? Yeah.
Wow.
I can't imagine being at that age, reading that off the shelf. Like, it just had to have been so ahead of its time. It just blew your mind. You know?
Have you told that to Tim?
No, I was hoping to meet him here this weekend.
Yeah, no,
I've never met him.
He canceled
Yeah.
out. I will tell him. It was actually kind of fun. This was at the time when DC wanted to reboot all of their characters and ignore their past. Now, you may have a hard time remembering that specific moment, because that specific moment has lasted about 35 years. But Dick Giordano, my boss, was under pressure to enforce that edict, and therefore I was under pressure to ignore it whenever I could. I did not want to resurrect the Flash as anything other than Wally West. He earned it, and that came out in Legends, which was one of my series, and I had to fight very aggressively for that, and other characters. Then Tim Truman comes along. Now Tim and I worked on Grimjack. We worked on all kinds of stuff, and I rescued him from TSR. And he's a phenomenal talent. His influences are from the underground comics. Great guys like Greg Irons and Rand Holmes and stuff. And it was just such a wonderful look for independent comics. And the idea of getting Tim involved at DC was A, kind of cool, and B, make him some money. You get paid regularly. So he pitches to me this idea of a tribute to Carl Fox, but it was a reimagining of the character. And I'm thinking, well, okay, I'll let Giordano win one. And we went with it. We developed it. It was certainly the same sort of grim and gritty stuff that Tim's work was associated with. That phrase actually came out of the work on Grimjack. And it was very, very well received. It sold in the quarter billions. I mean, it was just unbelievable. For dollar value, it might have brought in more shekels than any other Hawkman appearance, but there was a large and very vocal group of fans who hated it because it contradicted all of their fantasies, their favorite Hawkman stories. Well, yeah, that's why we do reboots, and it's also pretty much why I didn't like reboots. But, yeah, that was the purpose. So, sorry you don't like it, but, and the book sold despite that, and it sold well enough that we could do a spinoff, a Hawk World spinoff, which we did, but Tim wasn't really interested. He would contribute plotting ideas, and since he and John Ostrander had worked so well together on Grimjack, I naturally thought, well, okay, you two guys can work together. Great, Tim only wants to be involved a little bit. Bring Johnny O in, and he'll do it. And John was a master, probably still is if they'd give him any work, of straightening out continuity guffaws, which was a job that got more and more complicated every passing minute. And he did an adequate job of it, a good job of it in some cases, but the fans, that hardcore group of fans, hated it because it wasn't one of the 6 previous versions of Hawkman. So we had some heat on that. The series, I thought, failed only in that the writer and the artist did not get along, and that was for political reasons. Graham Nolan is pretty much on a right-wing sort of guy, not hysterical idiot type, I hasten to point out. And John is the exact opposite, and also, not a hysterical idiot. But the two of them just couldn't get past that. For years, for a couple of years, we did that. I thought the book didn't quite have the energy level, despite my effort, and I think that was because of the discordance between the two. Ultimately, it evolved. Hawk World became Hawkman, which was more commercial, maybe, considering Hawkman never really worked 100% on his own anyway, so maybe not. But it was a good series, and that Hawk World series was anthologized. They came out with a trade paperback and all that. And, Tim got another check, and that was terrific. And his work was spectacular. We did have one serious problem with that Hawk World Prestige format series. Kike Al-Katena, who is the inker, brilliant man, wonderful artist, swell guy, lived in Argentina. And Argentina exploded, and there was no more mail service from Argentina for a while due to the political pressures in Argentina. And we had that 3rd issue to come out, the final issue of a miniseries. Everybody wants to read it. Lord knows the retailers want to have it to sell. The distributors are mad about anything that ships late, and I don't blame them. We found a way to smuggle those last pages, I'm serious, through the help of Jerry Robinson, who was honored here in Baltimore about 10 years ago for his efforts in helping cartoonists who were in politically dangerous situations all across the world. Through his help, we got those pages smuggled out into the United States of America and to DC's offices. And that is cool. Did that answer your question?
Yes, you did.
Oh, good.
So we had Hawk World, and that ended. And as I said, Hawkman got a new series again. John writing it, Jan doing the art was glorious.
Yes.
And again that faded out. And then we hit the 20th century with Hawkman. There was the 90s stuff was harsh, and by the time we got here, Hawkman was appearing in JSA. There really wasn't a whole lot of the Qatar Hall showing up. But then we got here, and Jeff Johns did his Hawkman, and when New 52 happened, there was Savage Hawkman, which is, to me, difficult to navigate.
That's so polite. Let's hear it for that. Come on. That was really polite.
But let's get to this. Where is Hawkman? And so Rob, when you started this, you kind of got into it. What was your idea about what you said that Hawkman is the same character, the same being, is reincarnated across time and space and can overlap and whatever. What was your you had a goal, and you did an excellent job of sticking landing, but you got to your land, you got to a landing point that had closure. When you were going there, what was the goal you were getting at?
Well, I guess to contradict something I said earlier, the only two things I knew about Hawkman was one, the visual from the Super Friends show, and second, that he had a reputation for being the most confusing character in all of comics.
Sure.
Yeah.
And that appealed to me because everybody has holes in their game. You know, there's definitely things that I'm not as good at as I would like to be as a writer, but one thing I feel like I am good at is I'm good with puzzle pieces. And whenever somebody dumps some puzzle pieces on my desk, like some crazy crossover or whatever, I can always find a way to fit it together. So by reputation, he seemed like the ultimate puzzle, you know? And so not only would it be a challenge to me, can I figure out that puzzle, but also it's an opportunity to put a stamp on a character when really there aren't too many characters left that don't have that stamp, right? Like the Flash has had several stamps, you know, Batman's had 1 million stamps, but like Hawkman has had some defining runs, but not that one run that connected everything. And you could see how they tried to do it throughout the history of the character, but they weren't able to do it. So I was like, if we can figure out, Brian and I, a way to do that and stick that landing, then, you know, whatever else people ever want to say about me, we'll be the people who helped fix Hawkman, you know?
Yep.
And so we basically laid it all out there in the first issue, and we knew going in, either people are going to love this, because it was a lot of what you said. I had come off writing Hal Jordan, the Green Lantern Corps, which had Hal Jordan, Guy Gardner, John Stewart, and Kyle Rayner all in the same book.
Right.
And those fan bases all hate each other's guts. You know what I'm saying? So like, I didn't want to get into the Carter Hall, Qatar Hall, everybody hates each other thing again. I was like, let's find a way where we can make, no matter what you think or what Hawkman you read, this is your Hawkman.
That's right.
And if we can get people to buy into that, then that'll be awesome. But also, they could just as well hate our guts, and we're sunk right from the beginning, you know? And on that first day when it came out, and the first responses started to hit, you know, Brian and I were changing emails because he lives in England, and it was almost like, the things people were saying, it was almost like incredulity. Like, how did these guys fix it? By just adding and space, and suddenly the whole thing makes sense, you know? And it was a great feeling because we both, Brian especially, he has such a love, such a history with these characters, you know? And so for us to be able to have that reaction and be like, you know, I can't believe it, you know? They actually bought into it. And then it was just off to the races from there, and it just becomes so fun and so big. And, you know, there was a microverse Hawkman, and now instead of, you know, the Atom being the little guy and Hawkman is the big guy, you know, it's the reverse, and the Atom's the giant and Hawkman's the little guy. Just whatever we could throw at it. You know, the issue 4, Mike, if you read it, I mean, it's clearly a love letter to Hawkworld.
Oh,
you know, like
absolutely.
the Calmaran statue and the necklace, and like those 3 issues of Hawkworld, you can see.
You made my dick.
You know, and Brian has such a love for that as well, you know? And so we really went in there and just, and took all the fun and all the adventure and all the heroism of all these different iterations of the character, and suddenly it was all on the table because people have bought into and space. So now nothing is off limits. And
Can I ask a question? I'm not
yeah,
trying to
no, go
interrupt
for
you,
it.
but,
Yeah.
and this is directed at you with this. And here's, because we're doing this and, you know, your book was running within the last couple of years, right?
Yeah.
They give you a character, you pitch your idea. What pressures do you feel? Is there pressure from DC, this time we need it to be a hit? Or you feel, because I mean, most times when you get a character that had, like when I was on Shazam, there was no history of Shazam being really successful since the 1970s relaunch. And there's a kind of a feeling among editorial that you're kind of on your own. You know what I mean? You can come up with your great ideas and like, I mean, it's really impressive that you would weave all of it together, but I mean, from editorial's point of view, do they say, yeah, but you know, we need to hit this, or we finally need to sell this thing. Can you do this and this issue? I'm just curious because I haven't been involved with it.
My impression of the situation, and I don't know, I'm just going from my end of the conversations, right? I'm not in the editorial meetings over there or whatever, you know. My impression of the situation was that Hawkman had been used to some extent in the death metal series, which is very popular. And so we're like, well, what if we try to do something with Hawkman then? We have no idea what to do with it. You know, what are your ideas? The only idea I have was the end space thing. And I was so excited about it that if they had said, no, we don't want to do that, I would have said, well, then I got nothing, you know, to pass. I think they'd had some other writers turn in some pitches for Hawkman. And I don't know who those writers were, what those pitches were, but they didn't work out the way they wanted. They liked the end space thing, and so they wanted to go with it. But I don't know that I ever felt like, and this again, just me, my opinion, I don't know if they ever felt like there was this pressure to have sales, beyond everything having a pressure to have sales, because it wasn't like they put a lot behind it, you know? I mean, all the support that we got and all the people talking about the book and whatever, it was all just grassroots.
Yeah, and there was
I think there was like a house ad.
There was a tremendous amount on Twitter.
Right.
People, there was a couple guys who were ultimate Hawkman fans trying to save the book and all this stuff.
Sure, yeah.
The reason I ask it is because, like, when Mike was doing the Hawk World stuff, Mike used his currency, basically your editorial currency. He pushed this stuff, and I think that doesn't exist nowadays in that same way. Because
And that's the reason why.
A lot of things are happening
Because
above
you did
the
it.
individual editors, you know.
Because that was a pain in the ass.
But
It
I
was
mean,
even-
it's the idea of having an editor who's maybe got enough pull within that company to push for stuff and maybe to. That's what I'm saying. I mean that because
I mean,
my
I don't
experience
know
with
what
it.
has pulled that isn't Batman, to be honest with you.
Well, but I wonder if there's again, this is a change in the company, and we're talking about a character who's been around since the 40s. Is that each generation of like a company and being with the personnel, the structure of DC is very different than it used to be. In that editors used to be the guys who ran those books, and then it got to a point where the editors were almost like, you know, Dan DiDio or whoever would hand down, here's what you're doing, here's the But the big decisions existed above the editor, which you would then not have somebody who could really go to bat for you and say, Robert really wants to do this. Oh no, we have to cross over.
So there were definitely like the infection crossover or whatever.
Right,
And
right.
that came from up top.
Right.
You know, and again, it was puzzle pieces. I had
And
to
you got to
figure
play
out how to
along
fix,
because that's part of the market.
But I could definitely say that there were certain things I wanted to do in the series. And the two primary editors I had on the book were Andrew Marino, who did the first half, most of the first half, and then Andrea Shea, who did most of the second half. And both of them definitely went in. I mean, it was a fight for me to get to be able to do the Hawkman and Adam issue, double issue, right? Like the Adam doesn't sell, and we don't want to go to the microverse or whatever. And I was like, man, you're telling me I can't have Hawkman because she's being used elsewhere. Like, I have to be able to use some supporting cast, you know? And I promise you, we're going to do something cool with it, you know? It's Brian Hitch trying to John Adam, right? And so, like, I had, go for that, but the editors always supported me in those things. And using the JSA, they were supportive about fighting to finally get Hawkwoman to join the series, which I've been trying to do for so long, and allowing us to take almost more of a romance bent with it once we were able to do that, you know? That was all editorial going in and fighting for that.
That's good.
Taking ownership in the book because they like what we were doing too. And
but see, that's an important part of it. I don't see that I've not been working on stuff regularly. Haven't been involved in any executive level stuff. Mm-hmm. But it feels like as a creator, it'd be really hard to work in a situation where you didn't feel you had some support.
No, they were. I
guess the basic thing. All the good editors supported their creators.
Yeah.
And could fight, like in the old days, you'd take something to Dick or Jeanette Kahn or later on to Mike Carlin or whatever, there was always that sense that you could feel like if you wanted to do this story, no one would say, well, we'd rather you do, Hawkman killing somebody, or, whatever it is.
Yeah.
You
No,
know?
I've definitely had experiences like that in my career at various places, but to speak to Hawkman specifically, I mean, I'd share a foxhole with Andrew or Andrea anytime.
That's good. Yeah,
and,
that's good to hear.
and they were young too, very good, young, strong editors, which is not easy to find.
Yeah, because I work with people who were really pushed around, like during that period, like 2008, 9 through, early 2012, 2013. A lot of guys that would get pushed around because something was made a decision above their head that nobody told the editor, but then they have to change stuff, or they have to, and it always felt like, if you're going to dictate from there, then you should have a better plan or a better, outline of what's going to happen.
Right.
But the current group of titles from DC, I think this is probably true at Marvel as well, but the larger publishers, that sales bar we were talking about, has been lowered because sales are lower.
Yeah.
It's going back up, which is nice, but it's still, comparatively speaking, fairly low. And the importance of sales became in the aggregate, total line sales, because they were all gang printed. The economy of the economics of comics changed a little bit, so that printing prices went down for smaller print runs, and you can get away with a little bit more because nobody's going to run into your office and say this book isn't selling 100,000 copies. Get the hell out of here, But I appreciate what you're saying very much, because I would fight a lot. Now, I like fighting, but...
And the people who work with you knew you would do that. Yeah. And I mean, that not everybody was capable or even had the wherewithal, personality, whatever, to be able to do that. I mean, even in the old days, not everybody was, created equal, and not everybody was on the exact same level. Like, I mean, obviously Julie Schwartz pulled a lot of weight, and Julie got what Julie wanted for the most part. He seemed like a pretty...
Except for Superman.
Yeah.
He didn't want Superman.
Yeah.
So, we have about 15, a little bit less than 15 minutes, and go ahead. Let's get
Shelley Moldoff. You tell me which ones he worked on?
I'm sorry?
Shelley Moldoff.
Yeah.
Beginning.
He worked on the stuff in the 50, in the 4. I know he did some of the
Which
stuff in the
numbers
40.
did he work on?
We don't know
He
the
started
numbers
around the
right
third
now.
or fourth issue of Flash Comics, something like that.
On the Hawkman, which one did he write or work on?
Well, those are the ones in Flash Comics, the first
Yeah,
round.
he worked on Flash Comics in the 40s. I don't
Early
think-
40s.
Yeah, when Hawkman came back and got his own series, I don't think Shelley worked on any of those.
Oh, no.
No, Shelley's
No.
all retired by then.
Yeah, well,
Did
at least
he
from DC.
design the character? I mean, I remember him being the first artist on Hawkman.
It was Dennis Neville.
And it was very Flash Gordon. I mean, he was.
Well,
Well, let
surrounded
us
by
have-
Flash
let
and
us
his wives and stuff.
Acknowledge Alex Raymond for
That's
a
right,
moment.
yeah.
Oh, okay, because that's where Hawkman
I
started.
think when he was doing 1940s on
Oh,
Flash.
40s?
Comics. Yeah.
Yeah, only in the
And
40s.
he worked for Bob Kane, I guess,
Yeah.
as a ghost up through the 60s. But yeah, early on and he had a very illustrative style again, it was very inspired by Alex Raymond and Hawkman in the Flash Gordon comic and stuff. So,
If you get a chance to look at some old newspapers, there's plenty of books out there of 1930s and 40s newspaper strips. Alex Raymond's Flash Gordon that's where Hawkman and Hawk World even was created. And it was just the visuals and much of the concept was just totally swiped from Flash Gordon.
Everybody, Bob Kane did it too.
Oh, I'm
everybody-
not saying
yeah,
that
there
there's
was a
anything
lot of-
extraordinary here. Everybody
His
was
wife
a
is
big-
not necessarily a bad boy. Okay.
But Alex
Everybody
Raymond
doesn't know.
was Alex Raymond, goddammit, and he designed that look. And the only thing that changed really was somebody thought that carrying a mace was aerodynamic.
Does anybody have any? Go ahead.
Yeah, I have a question. Comes to Mr. Bull. Thank you for going to bat for all of us, because he's been my favorite character since I was a child. So
I'm sorry, I'm a little hard.
I'm sorry, thank you for going to bat for Wally West.
Oh.
Because he's been my favorite character since a child, so I appreciate that.
You're welcome. And thank you for saying that.
My question is for anybody. It's been mentioned a couple times that there seems to be a lot of affection amongst creators for the character of Hawkman, whatever iteration. But it's been mentioned a couple times that he's not ever quite gotten to that next level in terms of popularity and like some other characters. I was wondering if there's any insight as to why, like, you'll have a series that will come up and be well received, but it doesn't seem to. It seems to have like starts and stops throughout the. If I'm characterizing it correctly.
That's a great question and a great comment. So we've said that. Does anybody think that the wings were a stopping point for making the character more relatable to people and giving it that next level of popularity?
Don't you think a lot of it, though, is, I mean, there are certain characters that are destined to be good supporting characters. I mean, it's kind of like if you look at TV, there's certain actors that are good supporting, in the series, but never the star or something. I feel like that with, especially the Hawkman being so important in the All-Star comics as being part of that group, and maybe the fact that he didn't have his own book, whatever, he could have been leaned on, like, well, he's carrying that book. So maybe, but popularity is just really hard to gauge.
Well, I think it's like a lot of times you'll find someone who's an artist, the artist in the industry like you, but not the general public.
Yeah.
And I think Hawkman might be the kind of character who is a fan's character. If you were a dyed-in-the-wool comic fan, you like Hawkman. But if you were a general public comic reader, you might not be gravitated to it.
No, that's an important point. There are some characters that seem to work best not always on their own. They have to be on their own every once in a while to establish them and to fill in the blanks. Like Doctor Strange, for example. Characters that have constantly been revived. And by revived, I mean a new number one.
Well, look at Dr. Fate, too. I mean,
Dr. Fate.
Yeah,
Dr. Fate. Absolutely.
From my perspective, kind of coming in at the end of the train, I feel like the confusion of the character definitely became a bar to entry, probably starting in the Silver Age. But after that, like the biggest response that I got from retailers or whoever who just absolutely loved our series was that when they would try to sell somebody, they'd say, Hawkman never sells, Hawkman's never good. Yeah. Like, why am I going to try again? Yeah. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
And I think it never works because it's never worked.
But you're facing kind of a thing that you can't change because unless you sell, the guys at the comic stores who are buying them and ordering them aren't going to change their opinion.
It's like they're buying it thumb with the Hawkman hammer so many times. It's like, I'm not going to hit my thumb with that hammer again.
But a lot of it
if they're not selling the book, they're eating it.
Yeah. But I mean, a lot of it is like that, and you really can't predict what's going to be popular or what's going to grab somebody. You get Hawkman. I think the thread in there is really Joe Kubert. I mean, even though Gardner Fox got to do it over that long period, from the artist perspective or a fan reading the visual, is you have Kubert, running pretty much the whole run there because he did it in the Silver Age, he did it in the Golden Age. And
one of the last stories of his that were published, and I think it was published posthumously, was a Hawkman story that Joe wrote and drew.
Is that the Joe Kubert Presents?
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
Good. So heroes are often defined by their villains. Who are your favorite Hawkman villains?
Gentleman Ghost. I mean, I love Gentleman Ghost. I remember seeing him in a cartoon when I was younger. Like, that's just the coolest dude in the world. He's got a little ghost monocle.
The visuals.
When my son was a kid, they made the Raven the Bold TV show. They made a glow-in-the-dark Gentleman Ghost who rode like a dead horse. And I was like, I'm telling my wife that's for the kid. I'm buying that for myself. I still have that on the shelf in my house. I just thought it was the coolest.
Yeah.
Shadow Thief was always
Gentleman Ghost for me.
There was resistance to Gentleman Ghost when I was writing the series. They didn't want me to use Gentleman Ghost.
You're kidding.
No, they didn't. The editorial didn't like him because he's goofy, whatever. So I was able to squeeze him into that one issue where I go back in time and do an adventure with the Shade, and and like you find out how Hawkman and the Shade got to be friends as they were fighting Gentleman Ghost. It was like, I'm gonna do whatever I can to get Gentleman Ghost.
There's nothing more disturbing than those man hawks, the birds with the human faces.
yeah.
I mean, that always
Those
creeps
were
me out.
terrifying.
They were up there earlier, yeah.
Yeah, they were, they're here.
There they go, yeah. Yeah.
Those were
Oh, yeah.
terrifying. I think, and so I didn't read them, but when I saw the entry for them in Who's Who, I was like, who came up with this thing?
Those covers are also great, though. You know,
Yeah.
like
Oh,
just
yeah.
amazing to look at. You know.
God, you had.
Yeah, this is for Robert. I just wanted to thank you for your Hawkman series. For 2+ years, it was at the top of the stack.
Thank you.
And you know, I especially loved a lot of the things that you added to the lexicon, you know, like Sky Tyrants and Airwave and Genesis. And I was wondering, out of those concepts, are there any of those that you really would like to revisit?
Oh, all of them. Like when we really did that moment where Brian drew like all of the Hawkmen in that first issue, and he's tumbling through time, and there's all these versions. The concept there was like, long after Brian and I are done writing this, whenever somebody needs a fill-in issue, they can look at this 2-page spread and be like, that one looks interesting. I want to write a story about that one, you know, and just do stories out of them. It's really a character conceptually that's built perfectly for the monthly market, because whenever you need a fill-in artist, which artists do, you do a one-off issue about a Hawkman, and it fits exactly into the series because it makes sense, you know. And so I would love to do anything with any of those characters. My favorite, probably, if I was going to do one, would be the New Gods one, because I just love the New Gods. I mean, I try to fit the New Gods into everything I do. I just love that stuff, so probably that one.
You have questions back?
I guess piggybacking on his question, could it be argued that one reason why Hawkman never went to that next level is because he never had those villains that would draw you in? Because I mean, his villains were relatively limited to Gentleman Ghost, Shadow Thief, and Life.
The Rogues Gallery is a little thin, that's true.
That's
Great
true.
with the Vandal Savage in a way, because of that, especially that in
He
reincarnation.
always seemed to be like more like his villains. A lot of times, what's the villain of Justice League? And then later on, what was the villain of Justice Society? Rarely was ever his villain.
There was also some pushback, both during Julie Schwartz's day and now, all the way through, from readers, the younger readers, and certainly from some retailers, the older retailers, about the relationship between Hawkman and Hawker, Hawkwoman, which you also straightened out. Thank you. But the idea that they were married and that there was no love interest and that there was no character development beyond the fact that they were really married and you could play off of one another, it was felt by a bunch of really, really old white men that was not a successful way to do a comic book. And I suspect that was in part correct. There would be pushback from people who aren't interested in that. They should be. They miss some good stuff. But, you know, I mean, like Jerry said, you never know what's going to work.
So, if you're at the show, you can find Mike at 3606 in the Inside Comics group, Inside Studios. Jack is walking around today, so if you find him, thank him and
Sell him.
And Rob is at 3204, and Jerry is right next to him at 3205. And if you are looking in bargain boxes, and you find Infinity Inks and All-Star Squad, take them to him and get him to sign. Thank you so much for being here. I'm very happy that all of you were here to join us, and I think we're done, unless anybody has one more question. Go ahead.
Better be good. It's the last question.
Well, seeing as Hawkman is finally going to be in a movie in like Black Adam, do you think that if it's good, there's a chance he'll become more popular now that will have that exposure a bit?
Can I take that for 1 second and then I'll let you guys? So I hope so, but I don't have a lot of faith in it. There have been, and we didn't talk about this, I didn't want to get too much in it, I wanted to keep it comic, but there have been multiple experiences. Rob, does, as well as my probably first experience with Hawkman was Super Friends cartoons. He's been in CW shows, Smallville. I like the Smallville much better than the
Yeah, I did.
Arrow. But and he's in Stargirl, I think, too. But yeah, that would be great.
Legends in about 2 weeks, I think.
Oh, is he? Yeah, but the Legends was also Flash Arrow.
Yeah, but this is they're doing the 100th anniversary episode of
Okay,
Legends, and I still think they owe me a check for Legends. And they're bringing Hawkman back. I like what they did with Hawkman a lot.
Yeah.
It does. I would hope so, and I love Aldous Hodge. He's a great actor. But my fears are going to kill him, and I think that's another answer to why Hawkman's never been popular. He dies all the time, and it almost feels like the company itself doesn't respect him, or else why would they kill him? So like, why should I respect him? You know what I mean? So hopefully they don't just kill him off again, but that would be my fear. You know.
Yeah. Oh, I hadn't thought about that.
I'm sorry.
No, I'm
Mike.
disappointed.
Welcome to the real world, Mike.
Thanks. Oh, I avoid it as best I can.
All right, thank you so much.
Thank you, folks.